What is up, my friends? In this video, we're going to talk about Tieflings. So Tieflings are a race or species that you can be in Dungeons and Dragons. And they're basically plain-touched humanoids. They're primarily human in ancestry, but a lot of their bloodline comes from the lower planes, like the Nine Hells or even the Abyss. So the term Tiefling applies to all humans whose ancestry includes any evil extraplanar being from the lower planes, like a demon, devil, evil deity, or other various entities. And the name Tiefling is actually pretty common among all the planes, like Prime Material Plane, the lower planes. They're called Tieflings everywhere. So in the current era, the name Tiefling is most often given to people whose ancestry is connected with the Nine Hells. And actually, in many worlds, these are the most numerous type of tiefling, to where the word tiefling is actually synonymous with an infernal tiefling, which means they're coming from the Nine Hells. And the best known of these bear the blood of Asmodeus, who's pretty much the leader of the Nine Hells. These tieflings resemble humanoids, but they obviously have infernal heritage, like the horns and the tail and that kind of thing. Their skin ranges from the normal human tones to a hellish red, and their eyes are featureless orbs of solid black, red, white, silver, or gold. They have horns, and the horns can be in a bunch of different shapes. They can be curly, they can be straight up and down, they can be curled like a ram, they can be a spiral like a gazelle. Others have ugly flat plates that extend sideways from the forehead, but they always possess long, thick tails and like vampire-like pointed teeth. Their hair is usually a dark color, and it can actually be weird colors like red, purple, blue, that kind of thing. There are also tieflings who bear the blood of hellish beings other than Asmodeus, and they have varying physical appearances based on that. So unique traits could include smaller horns, fangs, a forked tongue. They could have cat-like eyes or even cloven hooves instead of feet. They could have scaly skin, red or dark blue skin, and sometimes they even smell like brimstone when they walk by. So yeah, you can definitely tell it's a tiefling. And actually, some tieflings don't even cast a shadow or have a reflection, so they're otherworldly. So they kind of have an otherworldly ambiance about them. Some actually have bat-like wings, and they can even have weird number of fingers. Like they could have 4 fingers, 6 fingers, 7 fingers. They could have goat-like furry legs, a strange tail that does not movable, glowing red eyes, or their skin could even be hot to the touch. Now there's another type of tiefling called a planar tiefling, and these bear a bloodline from the lower planes, but it's not the Nine Hells, it's not Asmodeus. And so these tieflings can be descended from evil beings like demons, rakshasas, night hags, or even avatars of evil deities. And their appearance varies considerably, but it often reflects their fiendish ancestor. Now, those that are descended from demons tend to have similar traits, but they don't have the hooves or the goat-like legs. Because the hooves and the goat-like legs are specific to those of devilish origin. Now, if a tiefling has cat-like eyes or even furry skin, it could indicate heritage from a rakshasa. Now, while bruised-looking blue skin is particular for those descended from night hags. Fangs and pointed teeth are actually common for all types of tieflings, though. Now, some tieflings can actually pass as a human, and this is actually the most common among tieflings of the distant planes, because their faint fiendish ancestry is so ancient and unknown that they just have one little feature that kind of indicates that they're a tiefling, like red eyes, small horns, or like a missing shadow or whatever. You know, they can't see themselves in the mirror. Now, as far as their personality goes, tieflings are usually considered to be like wicked, cruel, or maybe even like a criminal. And some actually do live up to that, but they can be a full range of good to evil and everything in between. And it varies considerably, you know, based on their bloodline too. Like if they're going to be, like if their bloodline goes back to the Nine Hells, they're probably going to be more lawful than if it's a fiendish ancestry. They'll probably be more chaotic. And tieflings do have a tendency to be solitary loners, but they're adaptable and they're resilient to hardship. So they possess a strong aptitude at whatever they dedicate themselves to, whether it's fighting or art or anything else. But their solitary driven nature actually makes them well suited as adventurers, wanderers, and researchers of magical lore. And when facing a challenge, the tiefling instinct is not to withdraw or retreat, but actually is to face the challenge head on. Tieflings want to make their own fates and defy the odds and take risks that even most humans wouldn't dare to do. And they're very fiercely independent. And since planar tieflings are so dissimilar from one another, they even rarely feel a sense of kinship with other tieflings. And actually, no tiefling kingdoms exist, at least in the Forgotten Realms. In your world, it can be whatever you want, of course. Tieflings are known for their quick temper, their stubbornness, their self-confidence, and their fickleness in relationships. They're actually said to move with a slithering walk, and tieflings learn from a young age that they can't count on others to care for them, so they develop a strong sense of self-reliance. And if you hire a tiefling for a task, they're gonna be pretty self-determined and somewhat disobedient. They're gonna do things how they're gonna do things. So weirdly, tieflings actually often develop a cautious admiration for the powerful true fiends to whom they share a connection. And the social rejection that tieflings typically face often leads tieflings to enter a life of crime, which actually furthers the social prejudice against their race. And the innate abilities that a tiefling has actually gives them an advantage in the criminal field. Tieflings have a slight affinity for dogs, rats, snakes, and ravens, and they feel surprisingly comfortable carrying an unholy weapon. Now let's take a look at their abilities. So tieflings almost always possess some supernatural abilities, but it varies by bloodline and from tiefling to tiefling. They commonly possess dark vision that allows them to see in complete darkness, although like humans, they cannot discern color in such dim light. And there's various magical abilities that they can like innately cast. The most commonly is Thaumaturgy, Hellish Rebuke, and Darkness. But some of the less common bloodlines, they can cast different spells like Vicious Mockery, Charm Person, Enthrall, Burning Hands, Deeper Darkness, Protection from Good, Bane, Chill Touch, Mirror Image, Summon Swarm, No Alignment, Pyrotechnics, Misdirection, Invisibility, Detect Magic, Comprehend Languages, Blur, Vampiric Touch, and numerous others. And some of them actually are born knowing how to speak the infernal language, but they've never even heard it or spoken it. They just know how to speak it at birth. They have an innate resistance to elements. Usually it's fire, but there's other tieflings that have the ability to resist cold and electricity. And a little known tiefling ability is they're actually apparently immune to the 8th layer of the Abyss, the Skin Shredder. Now this layer of the Abyss has the ability that if you go there over just a few days, it's going to turn you to chaotic evil. So apparently tieflings have an ability to resist that layer of the Abyss. So you never know when that information might come in handy. Now some small percentage of tieflings do have a unique rare trait, but more often than not, these rare traits are not beneficial. So some are harmed by holy water and sunlight. Some may be especially vulnerable to certain spells, and some may not be able to enter like sanctified ground. And some tieflings are actually especially vulnerable to silver weapons. Some may have a touch that withers living plants, and some might even have a weird presence that causes a strange like unease in animals and other people. Now, how are tieflings made? So tieflings can emerge in one of 3 ways. A human could be transformed into a tiefling with powerful magic. You could be the offspring of an existing tiefling, or the offspring of a human and a cambion or a half-fiend. So many of the evil extraplanar beings can naturally interbreed with humanoid races, or they could magically assume human form to do it. And the offspring of such a creature, it's usually a succubus or an incubus, and a human is a cambion or a half-fiend. And the offspring of one of these powerful half-blooded creatures in a normal human is a tiefling. So the succubus or the incubus would be the tiefling's grandparent in this scenario. So the offspring of 2 tieflings will be a tiefling, but the offspring of a tiefling and another humanoid is a 50-50 chance of being either the other parent or a tiefling. So it's either you're a tiefling or you're not. It's not there's no half tieflings. So the life expectancy of a tiefling is pretty much the same as a human. They tend to live about the same, some a few years longer, and some rare tieflings have actually lived to be about 150 years old. So that maybe one of those weird tiefling traits that they had. As far as their body and anatomy, so tieflings are a similar weight and height to humans, but on average they're slightly smaller and narrower. So adult males stand between 5'1" and 6'7", which is on average about an inch shorter than a human. And females are between 4'11" and 6'5", which is about 2 inches shorter than the average female human. Male tieflings weigh the same as male humans, approximately from 140 to 200 pounds, and females about 10 pounds lighter, so about 136 to 190. Tieflings are slightly slimmer than humans. An interesting fact, most tieflings are actually ambidextrous, so they're not left or right-handed. And if the tiefling happens to be descended from like an evil deity's avatar kind of thing, they're always going to have a birthmark that resembles the holy symbol of that deity, or they're going to have some trait which makes it very obvious which deity they descended from. Now, as far as their diet goes, tieflings eat normal human food, but they prefer meat, and they prefer it as rare as possible. And they'll readily consume bone, gristle, marrow, blubber, and blood. They can survive on unusual food, even ash, and can subsist on coal and inorganic rock for a time. So where do tieflings live? Well, they're very common in the planar city of Sigil and various other plains and planar cities, and many of them actually live in the Abyss and the Nine Hells, in any kind of cities that are in those places, and they serve as warriors in the Blood War. I guess the hellish ones and the demonic ones are fighting against each other in that never-ending war there, which that's kind of fun. But tieflings can be found everywhere in the worlds of the material plane. They are rare to uncommon, but they can be found on the worlds of Toril, Oerth, Eberron, many others. And believe it or not, even 1% of the non-drow in the Underdark city of Menzoberranzan are tieflings. Probably not that many. There's probably like 5 tieflings, but still, they're down there. Like I said, tieflings are uncommon, so in most worlds they don't actually possess kingdoms or societies of their own. They're basically scattered through other kingdoms, fitting in where they can. Sadly, tieflings are distrusted in most human cultures due to their, obvious devil-like appearance and poor reputation, let's be honest. And this common mistreatment does not cause tieflings to band together as it might, among humans or other races. They would form their own little neighborhoods and stuff like that, but tieflings don't do that. In fact, they isolate themselves and kind of become loners. Many tieflings are evil, but not all of them, not even close, and mistreatment by the societies that raise them, ironically, actually leads tieflings to become more cruel and more distrustful themselves. But the good ones will take society's distrust as a challenge, and improve society wrong and show themselves to be virtuous and good. Tiefling families, in the traditional sense, are actually quite rare. Many tieflings born to human parents who possess a latent infernal bloodline are actually abandoned at birth, and maybe like raised by a monastery, church, orphanage, adoptive parents, that kind of thing. And such individuals will often reach adulthood before they even meet another member of the tiefling race, if you will. And in Faerun, the Red Wizards of Thay often kidnap tiefling children to use them as spies and stuff like that. And they create these adoptive tiefling families, if you will. Now, some tieflings will form merchant families, which will allow them to live a life of relative safety and ease, thanks to the wealth and the money they got coming in and their ability to travel from place to place. Many who grow up in this kind of lifestyle, they kind of have a sheltered and comfortable life, and they're shielded from the prejudice that, most tieflings have to deal with. Sometimes a young tiefling who's just a wanderer will seek out a famous tiefling for a mentor, and these mentors often form like a short-lived, like little school, they call it, where wandering tieflings can kind of come in and then the bigwig tiefling, I guess, teaches them their ways, and then eventually that'll collapse when the founder moves on or passes away, that kind of thing. But these little schools can actually operate like thieves guilds or mage societies or something like that. It's little conclaves of tieflings out there. Tieflings do have an instinctive dislike of the Aasimar, but they have a slightly better relationship with the half-orcs, who are kind of like also misfits in society. And if you ask a tiefling about their ancestry, it's considered like a very big social faux pas, like a no-no. Don't do that. We don't talk about asthma. Tieflings do not have their own deity or religion, but some will actually worship the fiend that they're descended from, or the deity that being serves. And unsurprisingly, evil tieflings often have evil deities. Tieflings actually have an affinity for art also, especially later in their life, like older tieflings. And a lot of times they'll make art with themes like rage and the injustice of the multiverse and the corruption of the fringes of respectable human society, this kind of thing. They're very angsty. And these tieflings, they're actually very talented artists. And among the best known tiefling artists is one called Suruax. He works and he paints with pastels. He operates out of a shop in Chirpers, which is a big old restaurant in the city of Sigil. Now, since tieflings are so self-determined and they're usually outcasts and wanderers, that type of thing, tieflings actually do have a natural knack for adventuring. And they have a natural talent in a lot of different fields, especially rogues, fighters, and rangers. And they also make excellent warlocks. And you might wonder why, or not. It's because they're connected to the lower planes, so they kind of have the inside track on that sort of deal. So tieflings typically begin their adventuring career between the ages of 16 and 21, and that's mostly for the classes that don't require that much formal training, like your barbarians, rogues, sorcerers, that kind of thing. But for classes like cleric, monk, and wizard, they may not venture out until their 20s or early 30s. So tieflings do not have their own unique racial language. Most do speak common, but many of them do actually speak infernal, which is the language of the devils. But other tieflings will learn Abyssal because they think they have a fiendish ancestor, that kind of thing. And the ironic part is since many tieflings do not actually know their ancestry, some tieflings will learn the wrong language. So you may actually have a fiendish tiefling that learns infernal, and vice versa, just out of happenstance. As far as fashion, equipment, and clothing go, tieflings prefer dark clothing. Maroon, green, blue, and black are common colors. Typical tiefling fashion includes tight-fitted leggings, a vest, a tunic, and a long cape or jacket with coattails. Tieflings favor thin, light, and sharp weapons. Common melee weapons include the longsword, scimitar, stiletto, punch dagger, long spear, and a type of long polearm called a ranseur. Many train in two-weapon fighting, and the use of shields is less common than among humans. And for making range attacks, they favor the throwing dagger and hand crossbow, and they often use poison. As far as names go, a lot of Tieflings just use normal human names or the names of the cultures they live in. Some will choose infernal or abyssal names based on their ancestry. But interestingly, some Tieflings will adopt what's called a virtue name, and it represents an ideal that represents their identity, such as hope, music, or torment. And it's also not uncommon for a Tiefling to use multiple different aliases when they travel, to avoid being tracked down and that kind of thing. Now, as far as their history in Dungeons & Dragons are concerned, Tieflings first appeared in the Planescape campaign setting in 1994, where they were plane-dwelling humans with some fraction of, otherworldly heritage. And it's implied that that means a devil or demon or other evil being, but because of the era that TSR was operating in at that time, we didn't get explicit mentions of those kind of things, if you know what I'm talking about. Satanic Panic. So they're described as being easily mistaken for humans. So Tieflings received a monster entry in the Planescape Monsters Compendium, and that's from 1994. It describes all Tieflings as possessing one feature that gives away their heritage, like horns, and the Planeswalker's Handbook in 1996 expanded upon that with a table of random Tiefling traits, and these include physical attributes like horns, goat legs, red eyes, that kind of thing, and various supernatural abilities. And this is the book that introduced the good aligned counterpart, the Aasimar. Now in 3rd edition, that's when they first became a playable race, and that was with the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, which came out in the year 2000. And so Tieflings in 3rd edition were described and drawn as like mostly human-like in appearance, but occasionally having some telltale mark like horns or whatnot, but they often passed for humans. Dungeon Magazine at that time actually introduced the iconic Tiefling-looking character with wide eyebrow-like horns, a long tail, mottled pink skin, and it seems that this is the initial influence of their appearance in later editions. Now, in 4th edition, that's when Tiefling became a playable race in the actual player's handbook. And this edition completely changed up the Tiefling's lore and appearance closer to what we know today. And this edition made the biggest changes to the Tiefling's lore and their appearance in the race's history, really. Tieflings are now descendants of humans from the kingdom of Bel Tereth, whose noble houses made bargains with infernal powers to empower their bloodline. They have a distinctive devil-like appearance and almost always are depicted with dark pink skin, large horns, and a prehensile tail. And moving on to 5th edition, the Tieflings retain much of that appearance, but they also appear as a playable race in the Player's Handbook of 2014, but they're described as uncommon. Now, their official lore at that point was that they're descended from Asmodeus of the Nine Hells. However, in the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, it starts dropping out ideas for variant Tieflings that are not connected to Asmodeus. And now, according to the D&D 5th edition designer Mike Merles in 2018, Tiefling in 5th edition refers only to Tieflings connected to the Nine Hells, but other creatures previously defined as Tieflings, such as descendants of demons and Yugoloths, have been redefined as unnamed varieties of Plane Touched, and this contradicts the Unearthed Arcana, and which allowed the Abyssal Tieflings. So basically at this point, it's somewhat of a mess. Be what you want, have a good time. Tieflings are awesome. See ya!